for the lunch, as well as our other sponsors, Global Expertise, Forest Day, and the University of Waterloo. We really appreciate your support of this event, and not only this event, but for our location overall. We'll be introducing our panelists in just a few minutes, but right now I'd like to turn it over to Howard Wallach. He's one of our esteemed longtime Cultural Vistas board members. Howard.
Thank you, Kathy. Good morning, everybody. As Kathy said, I'm Howard Wallach, and I am a member of the board of directors of JPIGO, and I'm also the deputy chief HR officer at an organization called JPIGO, an affiliate of Johns Hopkins University that works to improve the lives of women and children in less resourced countries around the world. We work in 40 countries with a worldwide staff of 3,900 employees, only 10% of which is in the United States. So I'm here today as an active HR practitioner who daily faces the challenge we'll be discussing, and I'm eager to hear from our panelists and interact with others in our dialogue this morning. Before I continue, I want to mention two things. We are live streaming this event, and because of that, please silence your phones now. And if you want to tweet about this event, please do so, but please silence your I just want to thank all of you for joining us. We have a very distinguished, experienced group of speakers today that are enthused about and very well positioned to share their insights on the shifting dynamics of the workforce. I also want to thank, as Kathy did, and recognize our industry partners, Global Expertise and Forest Day, and our lunch sponsor, Zaros, for their support of today's symposium. The future of work is such a critical topic that many organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Economic Research Center, and many others are examining it, as the trends have major implications for both domestic and international economies and policies. Because Cultural Vistas sits at the intersection of higher education and the workforce by providing over 6,000 young professionals international work-based experiences, we're holding a number of conversations on the topic to engage all our stakeholder audiences, corporations, universities, students, and alumni, on how they can play a role in adapting to and shaping the future of work. Our discussion with our esteemed three groups of panelists will focus on three key themes. First, how does corporate America adapt to the trends? With in the U.S. with our current political environment. This promises to be a great discussion. Thank you all for joining us. I now want to especially thank and recognize our presenting sponsor, the University of Waterloo in Canada, represented today by Dr. Norm McCrae, Associate Provost. And Dr. McCrae, I'm proud to say, will be accepting our first University Partner of the Year award this evening at our 55th Gala celebration that will be held down the street at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. The University of Waterloo is Canada's top innovation university, recognized for its exemplary commitment to preparing its students for workforce success through its cooperative education program. With more than 36,000 students, the University of Waterloo is home to the world's largest co-op system of its kind. Every year, Waterloo works with over 6,900 employees in more than 60 different countries to facilitate nearly 20,000 work terms. 2018 marks 2 decades of Cultural Vistas partnership with the University of Waterloo. Since 1998, Cultural Vistas has sponsored and supported more than 10,500 Waterloo students' U.S. internship and training experiences, more than 800 companies across the U.S. through its role as an exchange visitor program sponsor. We're very proud and happy that the University of Waterloo is supporting the symposium today as our presenting sponsor. And here to tell us a little bit more about the university is Dr. Nora McCrae. Nora?
That's a lot lovely introduction and took most of my comments, actually. Not really. It's wonderful to be here, and a pleasure to be in this lovely city. And I look forward to the symposium today and the kind of conversations that we'll be having about this very important topic, the future of work. It was a natural fit for the University of Waterloo to support the conversation. The university started over 62 years ago, and one of its founding principles was the notion of engaging students in the world of work through our co-op program. It was there right from the very beginning. Every student who started at that time was engaged in the engineering co-op program, and it continues to this day to have a largest footprint in co-op globally. Because it's always been part of our mission is how do we connect students learning to the world of work. And so this topic is extraordinarily timely and one that we are very interested in learning from you about and how we can contribute to the conversation moving forward. Because one of the constants, as we all know, is change. So just because you've been engaged in the world of work and connecting students to the world of work doesn't mean that we always don't need to be adapting and changing just as we expect our students to do. So it's wonderful to be here and to be sponsoring this event, and I look forward to the panel. And as Howard says, we've had such a wonderful relationship with Cultural Vistas over the years. It would be very work in this lovely country without the terrific professional systems that Cultural Vistas has in place and the wonderful support we have from the team here. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the dialogue as the day progresses. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McRae. I'm Elizabeth Kumari. I'm Vice President of our Professional Exchanges here at Cultural Vistas and our legal counsel. I primarily oversee our J1 visas that are incoming, so around 4,600 or so of those. And so I'm really excited also to have the University of Waterloo here. We work with them on a daily basis. But now we're ready to get to our meat of the program. Our first panel, Corporate America and Workforce of Tomorrow. And I will turn it over to moderator Jackie Davidson, who, in addition to being the head of global mobility for Adobe, she wins the prize of traveling farthest to come today.
All right, thank you. Good morning, as Liz said, I'm Jackie Davidson. I'm the head of global mobility at Adobe and shared services for Asia Pacific as well. So I did come from Sydney, Australia last week, coincided with a business trip. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you for joining us this morning. So let me introduce our panelists today. We've got a great group of people to chat with. First, we've got Bernard down here at the end. Bernard is the global head of diversity and inclusion at Uber. And before that, he was the chief diversity and HRO for Hillary for America. And he's held several roles with the DNC, including chief diversity officer and director of HR. And outside of the corporate world, his contributions extend beyond that. He serves on the boards of Paladin, Ties Advocacy, and our own Cultural Vistas. So he's an ambassador for the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, and he's also a contributor to the Forbes Coaches Council. So welcome, Bernard. Thank you. And the next to Bernard, we have Derek Wilkinson. He's a partner in Odgers Bernstein's in Washington, D.C. He's also the head of the international development practice as well. Derek's got over 20 years of executive search experience, and he's got a particular focus on the international development community, including clients in the for-profit, non-profit, public sectors, as well as multilaterals, NGOs, and NGOs, associations, and affinity groups, and educational institutions as well. He specializes in recruitment from board level to general management, and has experience from several search firms, global search firms, boutique search firms. So I think Derek's well placed to talk about the future workforce and what skills and talents will be needed. And then next to me here, we have Steve Fair. He's a director of product marketing at Eightfold, a company that Gartner named a vendor in human capital management for talent acquisition. Through his work and contributions in companies like iThreat Cyber Group, IntegraChain, Aptus, Steve stopped digital privacy, counterfeiting, and spam. So thank you for that in particular. And he's played a key role in growing IntegraChain from a startup to getting acquired. And he was also the first NEA intern at Enki, which was a consumer product robotics maker. So interesting stuff. So with his extensive product marketing intelligence and diverse experience across a number of products and spaces, Steve would say that he is a full stack product marketer. So his passion is business changing, emerging tech. And his thought is if you build it, he can sell it. So great. Welcome. Great to have you guys here today. So we're talking about the future of the workforce with, regards to tech and artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics. So when you think about the future of the workplace and how technology is going to impact, influence that, what are your thoughts about that? Where do you see the future headed? So Steve, you want to start?
Sure. Well, thank you for the nice introduction. It's wonderful to see everyone here. So we hear a lot about automation, and it certainly is the, I think, dominant trend we see today in the workforce. I recently read a study that about 34% of work is automated today, and that is accelerating very quickly. It's going to be over 50% in 5 years. So that's a very scary thought for a lot of people. A lot of have found their professions disrupted by automation technology, whether that's robotics in warehouses, whether that's pending driverless car technology, hundreds and hundreds of examples. But you can't eliminate people from jobs. That's simply not possible. There's never going to be such a thing as a robot-owned company. And I think you also see that people who can embrace automation are finding themselves more successful in their jobs and in jobs that are changing today. So I don't think that automation is going to take jobs away from people, but people who can use the automation technology relevant to their jobs will inherit those jobs that people who cannot use that automation. And that's going to be a dominant trend in the coming years.
Okay, great.
I'd say one thing that I see a lot of is how automation and use of technology, collaborative technology especially, actually ends up putting more burden of work on an individual, especially when someone is working globally. They're expected to be able to do jobs of 2 or 3 people in many cases, not because roles are going unfilled, and there are roles that are going unfilled, no question, but because we have all these wonderful tools. We need you to work across 5 time zones to get all of this done, and the staff that you have is this. So I see that it actually creates a lot more burden on the individual, which has mental, emotional, and physical health impact, which I think we're just starting to touch on. So I'd say that's probably going to be a trend.
Interesting. Great. Nar.
Some interesting. Okay. When I think about the future of work and AI and machine learning, I think people need to view it with what it is. It's a tool. And you use tools to be more effective at your work, more effective at being successful. So I think when people over-index on the power of the tool and it displaces human work, I think you have to use the merit of this too. When I think about AI, people think it's a cure for all, but I think it could be deeply flawed. So like I work in diversity and inclusion, so if I take my implicit biases or my unconscious biases and I'm plugging it into AI, it's going to put out flawed results. So I think people need to use it as a tool and recognize its limitations. I'm not going to say AI is going to solve everything. Like I can still use a hammer or a screwdriver. It has its place in how we adapt to the future, but I don't think we should say like, I think we put a lot of fear in what AI can do and machine learning can do. I just think we need to recognize its role in terms of helping us adapt and just grow and more industrious.
So it sounds like really kind of harnessing what's out there and understanding what it can do. I think Elon Musk famously said earlier this year that he felt like AI was more dangerous than nuclear weapons and that we really needed to regulate it. And I think actually what he said was, it's insane. And then I think there's a lot of, feedback about that as well, especially from the tech sector, who's obviously very behind AI. So do you see any dangers? I mean, Derek, you already talked a little bit about some of the emotional impact, people losing their jobs.
Yeah.
When I think about driverless cars, right? Truck drivers, taxi drivers, Uber drivers, lots of people out there. I mean, self-driving cars looks like it's coming.
I think one aspect of it is that people can lose their jobs, but I think we are doing a fairly good job collectively, not in a structured way as it probably should be done, but to exposing people to more and more technologies. sometimes accidentally, sometimes as part of their job. But the worry that I'm starting to see, and especially because of the way that I recruit people to go from one organization to another organization, we have to take into account what their emotional well-being is associated with, and exploit it too, by the way. You're not happy here, so I'm going to recruit you elsewhere. But when we start to have our questions that are being asked, what's going to be required of me? What's really going to be required of me? Which means that our stakeholder intake and due diligence that we have to do about our role, whether it's a CEO role or lower in the organization, we have to be able to give them an understanding of a candid understanding. Here's what the environment is like. Here's what you would be hired to do as a change agent. And here are the lingering problems, some of which can be solved by automation, some of which people are afraid of regarding automation and change, just change management generally. But the emotional health piece, my organization just did a study about this. The emotional health piece associated with work is more associated with responsibility increases rather than loss of actual employment. It's this more and more is expected of the individual because automation can help that individual. And that's just something that it's kind of squishy. But we don't have as much understanding of what it actually means and what the impact's going to be.
Steve, any thoughts about that?
So Elon Musk is a really smart guy, and he's a lot smarter than I am. So I have to listen to what he and others like him say.
Sure.
I'm not so worried about this in the immediate future. As other roboticists and experts who think that, if not never, this is just something which is fundamentally not about to happen right now. We can talk about mining asteroids in space and conceptualize it, but it's not going to happen like this decade or next decade or the one after that.
So singularity.
Right. All the AI we have today is so-called weak AI. Weak AI meaning that it is a data analysis that can be very complex, very sophisticated. It can be recursive. It can use its results and learnings to improve itself. You can have multiple programs that feed off each other, but at some point it has to stop and have a human intervene, take an action, use the result, whatever that may be, because it can only answer one problem, one question.
Mm-hmm.
A strong AI, I think what Elon Musk and others are worried about, is a AI which could essentially create its own problem and solve it. Whether it does that like a human does may be somewhat irrelevant, because at that point it could be considered to be thinking. But no one's been able to figure out how to program that yet.
Keeping my fingers crossed. So, Steve, can you talk a little bit about Eightfold, the company that you're at? And we talked about finding the right candidate. What are the future skill sets that are going to be necessary? Can you tell the folks what Eightfold does? And there's a number of companies, that are doing what you guys are doing, but what is that exactly?
I like to think we're doing something a little bit different.
Sorry about that.
No, of course. So Eightfold is a great example of what you can do with AI using the best capabilities of technology. We are transforming talent for companies by helping them take a truly holistic view of all the information they have. Maybe put a simpler way, if you could answer questions about talent the way that you can answer questions using Google, that's what Eightfold could do.
So I'm a talent person at a company looking to do some hiring, and I use Eightfold, and it's going to help me do what?
Mm-hmm.
Screen people's candidates' resumes, info?
Sure. So today you may have to recruit people, search a lot of different systems you have for keywords. With Eightfold, you can get all of the people you have in your applicant tracking system, your human resource information systems, everyone you've recruited, everyone who has come to your website. All that information can be used to immediately give you a list of people who meet your requirements.
And as Bernard was talking about, kind of bias data in, bias data out, how does that get accounted for?
That's an interesting point, because AI it can be biased if you put bias in it. Our AI does not have bias in it. It's designed so that it does not take account of categories that we might be concerned about from a hiring perspective.
Interesting. Okay. I'll have to learn more about that. Bernard, going to you, one of the things I was took a look at online is you did an article last year talking about there was a lot of talk about the fact that we don't have a diverse workforce is that there's just not the pipeline for it. And Bernard has come back and said, that's a myth. That's not the case at all. It's not because we don't have a pipeline for it. There are people out there who meet the criteria. It's just that we're not, there's a couple things we're not doing right. So I'm paraphrasing your article a little bit, so correct me if I'm wrong. But we basically said, look, the lack of diversity is about sourcing differently. We need to do sourcing, we need to source differently. We need to overcome our hidden bias. Investing in STEM early is going to be key. And we really need to look at current staff and non-traditional students to retrain and upskill them. So can you talk a little bit more about that? And then also, as we look for more diverse candidates, as we look to retrain and upskill people, how do you see the AI and tech fitting into that?
So I thought a lot about what people could be doing. I think about first about recruiters, and there is this incongruence in terms of how we recruit, because let's say I have to hire 50 people per month. And if I found my formula that gives me 50 people per month, which gives me my bonus, if it takes me longer to find diverse hires, so if I have to change my formula, there's no incentive for me to do so. So even if I really care about diversifying the workforce, I do care about my bonus. I do care about hitting my goals in terms of performance. So you're pitted against yourself. So it works against what we're ultimately saying we want to achieve. So I think that's one problem. And I think the other part is we need to look in different places. When people say, we couldn't find anyone, well, where are you looking? If you keep going to the same place, if I were a fisherman and I go to my fishing hole and I'm like, man, there's no fish left. Well, let's keep fishing. That would be, I'd starve. And that's what's happening with the industry. People are starving because they aren't going to other places. It takes a little longer to scout it out, find it. But once you find those talent pools, then you could then go and pull great talent. You just have to do a little more work. It's like anything else. Like I remember when I would paint my house, you do all the prep. If you do the prep, then you have a better job painting it. Otherwise, you just paint, you have like a terrible product. And then so I think it's a lot of times also hiring managers, like people want to affirm their greatness. And so what I mean by that is, let's say I went to X school. I'm like, oh, that person's an X graduate like me. They must be good. And then it becomes so perpetuating because I'm affirming my greatness in the people that I hire. And that's a lack of, you're not going to recognize that bias, but that is a huge bias. And a lot of younger years now do that. There's a woman who went to my same undergrad and grad school, I said, she's going to be awesome. She was, but that's not always going to play out. So it's really important to think like, am I really finding the best talent? Am I hiring for comfort or am I hiring for competency? And you have to kind of look at your biases and own those and say like, what can we do? We say our state mission is this. How are we living up to it? So it's a matter of that. And then back to the point about looking within your systems. Again, a lot of times we recruit, once you find first place winner, you never look at second place. And there's a whole repository of people who are sitting there who wanted to work in your organization. You know that you put the time in the interview, and you know what their skill sets are. Like we had a person we hired who was really good. And the second our effort. Like Eightfold and others, you could find talent and take a lot of time and your to find first talent and kind of limit the biases because you're opening up the aperture, if you will, to find talent. So you just have to get more creative. You just can't go with the tried and true way.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. And Derek, the piece about upskilling and retraining, I know that's an area that you're particularly interested in and passionate about. Do you have any thoughts about how we can
Absolutely.
do that?
I mean, everything you said there is just fantastic gospel. I wish I had a lot of clients who felt the way that you think, because I've always said I've been in the talent business my entire career. There is no talent shortage. It doesn't exist. It is there's a need to identify that there are skill sets from one sector or one environment or one ecosystem that can be moved to another. And in fact, that's an area that I tend to specialize in. Mostly my clients like it, some of them don't like it. And the reason that they like it is because of what you said, like hires like. And I tend to do a lot of work, as was mentioned before, with international public sector entities, multilateral development banks. And there is a notion in some of those institutions that the only people that can do what we do are the people that are doing it now. And we need a whole bunch more people, so go find them. Wait a minute, you said that they're all in your group, why don't you know who they are? And a lot of what you're talking about, it does exist right in their own systems, and they forget about it or lose that data. But the other thing is looking at it through a different set of lenses, looking at what do you need done, and what is your sense of how this particular job is done inside of your sector or your institution right now. Who's doing the same thing better elsewhere? How do we expand the pools that we look in for candidates who can come in and bring best practices from other organizations, best practices from other sectors, getting past the discomfort and the fear and the perceived risk of, oh, it's not from global health. There's no way they can go in global health and do the work in global health because we all know what we're talking about and they don't. It's too much of a learning curve. Well, then you're always going to be dealing with so some of it, yes, of course, has to happen at the educational level, but a great deal of it can happen mid-career and throughout careers. Organizations will look at things differently, a bit of unconscious bias, and unconscious bias is insidious, it's everywhere. And you find it in absolutely every part of any recruitment, regardless of the organization. And it just has to be recognized and nudged away from on a regular basis. But there's plenty of talent out there, and it just happens to be in different buckets.
You need to look at it a little bit differently. When I worked at Google, one of the kind of internal mottos, informal internal mottos, was hire smart people and they'll figure it out. So you didn't have to have necessarily a specific skill. They felt like you could do this job. Hey, we're going to give you a try. We're going to do something a little bit different. And bringing in a different perspective, I think, can also be really helpful in roles as well. You look at it through a little bit different lens, think a little bit differently. Okay, so I'm a talent recruiter in 5 years, or let's say I'm a candidate in 5 years. I go to a talent recruiter, I'm trying to find a job. What kind of skills am I going to need in 5 years? I'm probably going to be applying for a job that doesn't even exist today, right? So what should I be working on now so that I'm prepared for the job of the future? Or let's say I've got, a couple of freshmen in high school who are going to be going to university. What might they be studying? And then what should they be studying so that they can get employed so that I don't have to work them anymore? That's my real goal.
All right, I'll throw one out there. Engineering and software programming are very important. Not everyone needs to be a Google level engineer, so I would maybe just simplify it to formal logic. Understanding formal logics that you can troubleshoot the robots that you're going to be managing.
Okay, excellent, great.
I'd say learn how to learn, know how to gain new knowledge, be in your thinking, be flexible in your thinking. If you're closed-minded, you're going to miss it.
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, there's a book, it's called Fixed Mindset versus Growth Mindset, so we might be familiar with it. And I remember when I was a child, I probably had a fixed mindset, because if I were that smart, I'd automatically achieve these things. But as I've gotten older, I realized I have a growth mindset in certain aspects where like I'm getting better, and should I time it and the practice, and I'm getting better. So I've adjusted my mind in terms of what I think success is and what I can achieve. So if I were looking to get into what's next, just be you're being adaptive, recognizing that I don't know that, and therefore I can never learn it. If you put those limitations on yourself, then you won't. I'd say that's really important. I think when we think about cryptocurrencies and blockchain, to me that's really exciting and interesting because there's kind of uncharted territory. So if you're in fintech and you're doing it now, and then by 5 years from now maybe it's fully solidified, you would have been the foremost person doing this because you know more about it than others. I think that's a good place to go. I'm really interested in it just because I don't know much about it, but it seems really exciting.
Great. Thank you. I want to make sure that we have time to get to some questions from the audience, and I think people probably have a lot of things to ask. Any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience and the viewers about tech and the future of the workplace? Good.
I say that, look, the evolution continues to happen. Technology is always going to get better, and there's going to be but old-fashioned values, work ethic, and an open mind are what help people adapt to it. That's really what matters, and being culturally sensitive to another country's culture or to the culture of another organization, and knowing how to navigate quickly is what really gets people ahead the fastest from the perspective that I have, putting people into new organizations.
And I'll tell you, like, again, these are all tools, and tools are only effective if you know how to use them. So you have to be agile and say, like, I don't know how to use that yet, but I can figure it out. There's lots of tutorials. Everyone wants to explain these things. You can go on YouTube, and you can be a self-studier. And if you keep approaching it that way, at least you have the aptitude to learn. Just keep adapting.
So maybe a little thing, but I've noticed the last few years that virtual collaboration has moved toward video. And I think that's really this issue of cultural collaboration and making sure that you're fully there, even if you're not physically there. I've personally found that to be extraordinarily helpful. So I'm hoping that's something we're going to continue to see more of a push toward.
Great point. And I'll add something to that as a recruiter. Always be prepared that whatever conversation you're going to have on an electronic device, that you expect it to be video, because it will be. The number of people that I have conversations with around the world and say, "Oh, can you see me on the camera? I can't see you." "Oh, this is going to be video."
Well, to that point, that's really transformed business over the last however many years, right? I mean, it's made all the difference in the world. Businesses are saving money because people don't have to travel. You can work, internationally very easily, except when everybody wants to get their time zone in the right time frame, right? And also remote working, right? It changes the whole structure of the workplace in some ways. Remote workers, people working from home, people working in different locations. Things have changed so much. Sometimes I feel like things have changed so much, even in the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. I can't even imagine what's coming in the next 5 to 10. So.
I think the advent of video technology for these kinds of collaborative communications is because we still want the human element, we still want to interact with the person. I noticed after September 11th that the increase in use of video technology for interviewing, even my interviews with candidate and client, they went on the increase, and they continue to increase because they still want that human element. And if you can't be there because of the cost considerations sometimes for my clients, they've got technology and they want to see what your expression is and how you report yourself.
Right.
Absolutely. And we want to open it up for any audience questions. Yes, please, Howard.
I have one. I wanted to add just experience as an HR practitioner. In my organization, we do not have a big challenge finding talent, even clinical or technical talent. What we have a big problem is once we get them and they move into supervisory positions, having good supervisory management. And I'm managing right now, leading a leadership development program that has 13 elements, and I'm not going to get all of them, but they're leadership, ethics, emotional intelligence, communications, change management, team building and management, innovation, diversity, inclusion, strategic thinking, decision making, and business acumen. I'm missing 2 or 3, but those things can be taught. And as Barnard said, with the growth thing, as you learn and you experience things, you get better. We found that, and I share what you all said as things we need to add, and I may add that to a future iteration of the program. But we found one of the biggest things is getting people to understand that there's a difference being an expert in what you do and then managing a team of experts to get them to add value to an organization. Very different skill sets. And as HR people and universities, I don't think some business schools and MBA programs touch on some of this, but I don't personally think that they address it in an integral, cohesive way. We all need to do more in that regard.
And actually, our next panel about the role of higher education in preparing students will go right to that. Sharma, I think you had a question.
Thank you. Amazing thoughts. And I'm going to take an educational lens at that. The rate at which the world of work is changing, it's almost impossible for universities to be the sole generators of academic knowledge. You're preparing these kids to come to you. And there's a codependence between universities and the industry. So how do you see companies sports being co-educators in that process of skills development, in addition to just providing internship opportunities?
Embedded curriculum. What I saw one time was, I think it's Northrop Grumman or Lockheed Martin, but they would have certain campuses near the shipbuilding and embed the curriculum to really help upskill those students. Because if you knew your track and you really want to do that, you know you pretty much have a guaranteed profession coming out of school because you are doing the curriculum. Same thing with HR, like SHRM. I used to work at SHRM, so obviously places are almost embedding their curriculum, so that way you are truly prepared for when you get into the workforce. Because the thing about getting a job is, one, feeling included, but also being able to drive. You feel more supported, you feel like you're more equipped if you have that curriculum and that knowledge. That's what the internship helps with. If you actually know, like, specifically the language of the land at X company, I feel more like I'm going to be successful at the long run. So I think if you have embedded curriculum, it's going to go on for colleges and then necessarily do that, but there might be success. I think that is a great way to help ensure kids are successful, that they're gainfully employed, and they stay for a while.
My sector is absolutely the worst at helping solve that problem because we're hired to focus on go get the subject matter expert, the absolute perfect person, or the 5 perfect people. But my firm actually has taken a bit of a left turn on that. We are trying to focus on ensuring that the experience of an individual with whom we interact is very different from what they usually experience with search. What they usually experience with search, unfortunately, is we only love you as long as we need you. So we're never going to call you back and tell you that you didn't get the job, but we're going to call you 6 months later and act like we're best buddies. We will never really give you the feedback that you need that's developmental so that you can not make the same mistake again. Little things like that. So we're trying to change the whole paradigm on that, and we're clunking our way through some search people who are hired to find subject matter or managers or both in the same person, which is not always the easiest thing to do. But where I've seen it with clients that it works is exactly that: embedded curriculum, corporate universities that adapt to 2 things. One, keeping the organization with which someone is working an interesting, thoughtful, caring place to work that they are proud of staying in, and also professionally developing them and saying out loud, hey, listen, we're going to develop you, and even though we're trying to make this the greatest place for you to stay, go. Take what you learn here and stay a friend in the organization. And that's where the corporate universities are going their ways to work every year are the ones that have that attitude, and it's developmental, and they can stay in touch with former employees in that way. Professional services firms are pretty good about that. But it's a partnership. When organizations can come to an organization, a search firm like ours, say, find me the best person, that actually diminishes. I'm not selling the sector right now very well, but it is a problem. It is a continued problem that we have in the search and the recruitment business. Because we want to convince everybody we got the talent, we got everybody that you need. You want us thinking for you. But that's not what clients want. They want thoughtful engagement, consultation on these subjects we've been talking about today. So the organizations that are frankly the ones that we consider academy companies, ones that we want to recruit out of, but elsewhere are the ones that do the best job at sharing that knowledge with people coming in from the beginning of their career or even near the end of their career.
Great. Any other questions? Yes, please.
So my name is Garrett Johnson. I work for the German Center for Research and Innovation here in New York, but I'm from Eastern Kentucky, and this question is kind of going to come from that perspective. So a lot of this discussion has been about how the world is going to change, how jobs are going to change with automation, etc. But there are entire populations and regions of the world and even here in the United States that were not included in the digital revolution in the first place, let alone what's going to come after. So do you all have any thoughts on how vulnerable populations or places in the world where these jobs don't exist in the first place also be included in this discussion?
I think distributed workforce is going to be the way of the future. I think, just like, for instance, I currently live outside of San Francisco. I think it's the most expensive place in America right now, which makes it very difficult to attract talent because you're going to go, I really want that job, but I don't want to live there because the standard of living is so high. I think we have to start looking at the model differently. If you are in Eastern Kentucky, why can't you be distributed workforce and work from home there? I think, what is it, GitHub? 60% of the staff sits elsewhere outside of their HQ and it's working. So I think as more of those models occur, you can see the success metrics in terms of companies having a distributed workforce. They can go to Eastern Kentucky, they can go to Cincinnati, they can go all these different places, find the talent there. I don't have to move. I create a standard of living there. And then it creates a business case for like, we should keep going there. And like what I call them rising cities can kind of rise up to. But it just takes a few bold companies to do so.
I've noticed companies into the United States market, they have a different perspective on doing that. A similar perspective that we American companies have when looking at Europe. Ireland was a great example. Years ago, people said, hey, let's set up operations in Ireland because they speak English, they're highly educated, the cost of living is low, we can have a really good employee base here. So European and Asian companies that are starting to come to the United States do that. They look at places like Southwestern Virginia, Eastern Tennessee, where you have high degree of education, but it's not always, the courage to do it is not always there. And they usually are setting up a bricks and mortar operation there, which doesn't necessarily give those new skills. So that's kind of a poor answer to what you're talking about. It is something that has to be worked on, and it's going to be, it may take activist potential employees to do it. That may be an idea. This is something we were talking about before. But there is change that needs to happen. I deal with global South countries and recruiting people out of them and organizations that support people and create small and medium enterprises in those global South countries. And what happened and continues to happen in those is that through the use of mobile communications, they're educating people and they're creating enterprising folks who are entrepreneurial and demonstrating that they have capability and getting tied together. We're not doing that for many parts of our own country. There's a bigger argument to be made there, I think.
Great question. And yes, please.
I wanted to go back to the topic of AI. So I do work in the engineering field, so this topic is pretty close to home for me. So we're in a room right now of, I'd say, pretty, I don't want to say like-minded, but similar level type of people, right? So we're just all nodding our heads, saying, yes, of course, it makes sense that hire smart people because they'll learn, or in 5 years, like, people can learn these logic skills or programming skills. It's we're all nodding our heads and saying, like, yes, that's doable. But the thing is that the jobs that these AI is replacing, they're not of our ability or stature or means. So what is the actual solution of replacing these truck drivers that are going to have automated systems, or replacing farmers, even, or replacing military folks? Because anything that a human can do, a machine can do better.
more accurately and faster. So, yes, we can talk about, the university kids of the future, like learning these skills, but what do you do with the middle-aged folks that, those are the folks that you're gonna be, displaced. So what is that solution?
No, it's
I mean, I think
no, it's a great question, but I think we asked that question earlier when we brought up the truck drivers,
Right.
people who are doing automated assembly line kind of things or things like that. You've got, or even some of the financial work that's getting taken. You don't need to have somebody input stuff into Excel. You just have an OCR that just takes care of everything and does the computations and pays bills and all of that. So
I think it's a two-part deal. So the two-part is you have to be able to return. If you're going to try to hang on to the industry that you know is going away, everyone's taking off the, you're trying to fight it now. And I see that a lot. People are like, we got to save this industry. It's like erosion. Erosion happens. There's nothing you do like that. So yeah, that first part, that's the hard part. That's he's very Virginia, and there's a bunch of towns everywhere. And the entire process is so those are as much as they could. This is the shelf. Some of the things we were looking at what the policies we can move to the next one. Which hopefully help people stay longer and always be improved so that they can be more. I think that's the smart thing that we should do versus waiting for the end is getting all that they can, extracting and rolling out. It's a very short term perspective.
So we've often heard AI called the fourth industrial revolution. And one thing that's not talked about enough about the industrial revolution is the political revolution, ultimately. And I think a large part of the answer to this incredibly difficult problem is eventually political as well. Within the technological realm, though, it is about motivation. This comment that hire smart people. I would slightly phrase that to hire motivated people who will want to work as available and be excited at that time for training, that kind of work. So, past years, those more mechanics and maybe the kind of jobs became IT jobs, and I think those are going to provide maintenance. There's an infinite demand. There's always going to be work available to be created.
This is a little blue sky that I've been hoping, and some happens in a few parts of the community college system is something that if corporations are able to partner and invest in those, because the government probably isn't going to. It's a start on that. But if that were to happen, especially in rural states or states where, Rust Belt states where you've got a lot of people who are mechanics or lower level engineers, that could be a solution. But again, there's got to be the political courage for that to happen.
We have time for one more question. Okay, so I think in the background.
I just wanted to ask the panel if they could comment on international work experience, in particular with nurturing young talent. So a lot of people in the room work in the exchange visitor world, where we're giving young people the opportunity to go and work and study overseas, and that is assessed and valued by companies. I always think, a lot of things you talk about on the emotional intelligence side, we see our participants just have an accelerated experience with that. And I've never really understood why companies don't focus on universities that provide a study abroad, going straight to the study abroad centres or alumni opportunities where young people and go overseas and develop skills, sort of skills where you can be taught something and everything else that comes with that experience and present to a young person. How interested are companies in the company?
Exchange of any kind. But if the tone is not set from the top of that organization, it will be attention to throughout most of the organization. And that doesn't mean CEO, it means it ranks and board. And some organizations are not where that's concerned. They don't see the value associated with the fact there's some that say, I don't quite understand what you say in America doing what you're doing or whatever in your country. So it's a product of the leadership situation, in my opinion. I think continuing as this organization does to demonstrate and advocate for the intrinsic value of what a person learns by going and seeking him or herself and completely different culture, how that gives you the agility and flexibility and cultural understanding. Please continue to evangelize it because it is an incredibly valuable thing and undervalued in this country, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we very much have I'm looking at it from America, but we have a huge perspective. It's America and everybody else. So therefore, trying to do it our way is the wrong way. But I think as we become more globalized, and as people, that's why the cultural exchange is very important, because if you go to different industries, you go to different countries, different cultural nuances that will either be successful or a super failure. And I think you have to understand those considerations. I think you go, like when I've traveled abroad, I recognize I'm a sensitive American. I need to get over it somewhere else. I need to kind of adapt where I am. But it's hard to see it that way if that's not your business model. And you don't have a lot of international exposure, or if your HQ is so dominant that that allows voice. Because we were talking about employee activism. If that's a dominant force, they don't care about it. They have to care about whatever their interests are. So I think it's going to naturally happen. Everyone's, the world is flat. And the more we do that, the more we have international business, it's going to happen, but I think it's a matter of time.
Thank you very much for the great question. Thank you to our panelists and our so 10:20, come back please. So stop the okay, so Stacy to do your work.
Yeah.
It's fine, you know, it's fine a little bit, but that's.
Testing one. Testing, testing. Three.
great discussion so far, and I'm excited to work on the top of our next panel. Bring your coffee packets to the grill. Great, thank you. We'll continue on with our program. So before we begin our next panel, which will be very exciting about higher education, I'd like to introduce Richard Allen with American Corporate Benefits, who is going to speak firsthand on his experience hosting an international intern. Richard?
Thank you very much. So, we have a small firm, 6,000 square feet here in William Street, and before actually all the summer, and we recruited organizations that work within the city. Our experience has been always positive, but the work output has not always been something that we found that I got with cultural business. And that's sometimes not the goal, to get some huge work output. But our expectations were very kind of modest. We have one intern that went on to college and actually works with us now. And so we kind of have a history of working with interns, and in a couple of instances they came back as full-time employees at some point. What's amazing with cultural business is that it's a whole different experience, totally. First of all, and said, okay, the organization to work with to get a summer intern, pull them up. The support was phenomenal. I mean, the analysis is what we are all about, the analysis of what the work with the intern would do, expectations about what our responsibilities are. It was very refreshing rather than just throw somebody into it and hope that everything's going to work out. I was personally amazed at the quality of intern that we got. Really investigated, knew, I didn't have to explain what our company does. She knew more about it than some of our employees probably did. And it was really, really, for us, something refreshing, because the person came in, and I think it's important that what the employer gives as well. One is that understanding that you're dealing with a very young person, for instance, and they may not have the background working in an office. So a lot of support in the sense of making them feel comfortable. I mean, the first interview is always a little bit awkward, so have to give a lot of leeway. When we're dealing with someone from outside the United States, different language, I just felt like, I said, oh, wow, your English is quite good. And it really wasn't when they first came in. And I have to tell you, by the end of the interview, it was incredible because they were obviously nervous. So a little bit of understanding of what it's about, also that we're dealing with young people. And when they came in, it's almost to make them feel positive and good about themselves and who they are. So every time we introduced them, it was always that very extreme, putting some adjectives that would describe them as being very positive, so that they felt good about themselves and about the job. We gave their own office, which I think is something that they're not, that really made a big impact, even though we didn't think about it. We just said, oh, we have this office that we could use for the summer, let's put them in here, and rather than sitting with somebody else. And they took a picture of their office as soon as they saw it, like told their friends, and I don't know what they do, Snapchat or whatever it's called. So it was extremely positive. And then we had, we had to think about coming into New York. Usually they're only here for the summer. That's the one that we had, was a summer intern. and 4 months to do this. And they don't know New York, and so really set them up in a sense of what they could do and invite them to various functions so that it's not just staying in an office. So they really had an experience going out to various gatherings that moved out that would be kids in the field, some of them, not even the kids in the field. Maybe you'd like to go and feel free to do with your friend. And you know, it's very funny because outside of the work environment, but it was really, I think they really enjoyed it, so their friends. I share that with you because we want to give them a very good experience. Now let's talk about the work product. I mean, this was where I was really blown away because we had a project that we put her on, and I really had low expectations. And when I say low expectations, meaning that we would get things accomplished, but I was amazed at how much we and they had to interact with quite a few various levels of people within the organization and outside the organization, and really was very, very high level. So I think that one of the things that my takeaway was that we're not dealing with just some of the panelists before talked about recruiting. Really, it was recruiting the best and the brightest. I just have to say what it is. And we also kind of want to support them a bit, even though in this particular program, they receive some sort of small stipend while they're here as an intern. We also gave them an extra, car fare and lunch kind of money every, weekly, but money so that they had it. That was very, very positive. It's a small amount of money, but it really meant something in the sense of our commitment to them and their commitment to us. And we put their name on the door, project their name with project coordinator on the door so that they really felt extremely positive. So after that experience, we applied to get an 8-month intern. If they both got 4 months, imagine we'll get 8 months. And I said, well, what were your expectations? Could be a different person, different experience. Well, we interviewed the fellow who's going to be the intern. All the dates he gave me kind of didn't work, and I told him, it's not going to work, and we can do it over the phone. He said, no, I really want to come in. And he came in. I have to tell you, again, he knew more about our company than people who know us for 10 years. He was, I guess, so eager to learn what the project was that we weren't prepared. I mean, it's going to be a little silly for those thoughts. So we really weren't prepared to give him all the information, but we wanted it, and we had to pull together, and he wants to be able to level when he comes in. So I guess the overall experience was incredible, and I think they're having me speak today because we had such a great experience, and the support that we got is something that I just cannot explain it in a way that's going to work with a lot of people here, because you all obviously have HR experience, some of you have HR experience, but it was where the support on a constant level was there. And then the evaluation after, we were excited about doing the evaluation because they were so good. We wanted to make sure that we got the credit for it. So I don't think there's any question. I think we went over it pretty broadly, but if anyone after would like to speak, I'd like to talk to you about it. Last thing is that I mentioned this to some of the boards and told about the experience that we had, and someone was extremely interested, and I hooked them up with Cultural Vistas. So I don't know if Cultural Vistas needs employers, maybe too many employers, not enough interns, but feel free. So the idea is that you have a really wealth of value here, and if your organization can be certified, I think you'll get a lot more out of it than you actually do. Thank you very much.
opportunity to hear from the host company's point of view versus just the individual participants. So it really is an value add to the company as well. So next up, our second panel is on the role of higher education in preparing students for work. Leading the panel today is John Hersha, who, among many other things, is the executive producer and host of the award-winning show Global Perspectives. Joining us today from the University of Central Florida, John.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be with my esteemed co-panelists here. I'll introduce them first. To my far left is Dr. Cheryl Atherley, who is Vice President and Vice Provost for National Affairs at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania, which has played a key role in every industrial revolution that we've had in this country, including the one we're going through currently. And to my immediate left is Dr. Nora McCrae, who has been introduced and who has spoken already, but in her new capacity as Associate Director for Cooperative and Experiential Education at Berkeley University. So it's a pleasure to have both of you. You are the experts. I'm simply facilitating. I wear several hats at the University of Central Florida. I mentioned PBS, which is a wonderful opportunity for the university. My main job is directing global perspectives for the university, and basically my work falls into three areas: thought leadership, critical issues. We develop programs that we incubate move to academic departments, the international training academy, if you will, where we equip students with study skills they're not getting in the classroom and in other experiences on campus. And just to give you an example, this term had just a few interns and fellows, 50 of them here, and the plan to double this every have this large cohort. But just the program about 15 semester had the opportunity to sit down in a national security writing workshop with a prominent instructor in the subject area for the University of Southern California, just to give you one example. So we're always looking for new opportunities to add offerings to what they get in this very, very special setting. But what I would like to do is turn to my colleagues. I know we've discussed this a little bit, but each of you has, at your institutions, has worked on programs this feature issue. And so I'll start with Cheryl and give us a couple of examples of what you're working on.
Sure. Well, first, I'm delighted to be here, and this is a topic that is something that's very important at Lehigh University. And I think to get into this, I can take just a couple minutes to say a few words about Lehigh, because John, you referenced some of our history, which is really quite relevant to this conversation. So Lehigh University is located in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour and a half from here, from New York. But Bethlehem, probably most people recognize it because of Bethlehem Steel, which was the second largest U.S. steel manufacturer. And Bethlehem Steel was headquartered just about a mile from the Lehigh campus. And the story of Bethlehem Steel is really a story of the history of American manufacturing to this. And Bethlehem was truly a one industry town. It was the major employer, but also very connected to the story of Lehigh for a very long time. Well, you know what happened to Bethlehem Steel, that by mid-90s was bankrupt, and by 2001 doors closed, and all of a sudden, as the mayor of Bethlehem reminds us, that overnight the employment rate in the city of Bethlehem jumped by about 25%. And that had tremendous impact also on the university, which had been founded as an engineering university, one that has its deep roots in materials, in construction, and civil engineering to that, and so very much tied to that kind of as well. Well, when something like that happens, it really puts you into a position of kind of reconsidering where do you fit to this. And the story of Bethlehem and indeed northeastern Pennsylvania now is a really exciting one of kind of redirection toward manufacturing, re-engineering itself as being a kind of a high-end manufacturing zone. And I have a lot to talk about to that. But into this also comes a really kind of key question of the university really considering who is it that we're educating, what are we preparing students for as well. And that's exactly where we sit now. And so that is being sort of reconsidered to how do you stay sort of true to your roots as a solid school with that and a solid background in this kind of work with professional learning and professional experience. But look at the kinds of changes in the work world that our first panel really talked about. Probably, and there's two directions that is happening that I think are probably the most exciting onto that. We're really reconsidering and rethinking the direction of the kind of students that we're educating. One of the ways that that's happening is with something that's called the Mountaintop Initiative. Mountaintop is an initiative around creative inquiry and looking at that we're training students to be thinking differently about how they enter the work world. So certainly still staying deeply steeped in the professional knowledge, but thinking instead about creating, providing students the kind of experiences to be working in interdisciplinary teams on problems that they learn to define and identify themselves. Much more around the kind of self-directed learning to this. The emphasis around lifelong learning to that. And it's really become a kind of campus initiative to be bringing these kind of models of creative inquiry across all disciplines to be creating students who are prepared around that area. To that. The second space that this is happening is with work that we're doing in the area of entrepreneurial mindset. Looking at how then, if the world of work is changing and kind of jobs that students are doing, to be in a position to be able to think about how to find their own and find their own solutions. And so we're doing quite a lot in that space also around entrepreneurial learning, so much as this, but rather think entrepreneurially around that kind of experience there. I would say then sort of overlaying this more about this piece, overlaying in this is looking at what that means to have students that are global. Doing that in an international global international programs are essential for that as well. So.
Work not just outstanding in terms of the university, in terms of the country, but in terms of the world. You provide the most of the time of any institution that I could think of, academic institution. Tell us how that evolved and in connection with this.
Yeah. So as I mentioned in my remarks, when I was welcoming you all here, the University of Waterloo started over 62 years ago with this notion of hands-on learning being integrated completely into the curriculum. And as a result, at the start of 75 engineering students, we now have 36,000 students on our campus and 21,000 work terms every year that are happening in 62 different countries. What that has done is that, first of all, our institution is quite unique in the sense that it's a tri-semester program. There are always classes going on all the time. It's not depending what's going on summer break or anything like that, because in order to facilitate students coming in, and as I'm sure you all understand what the program is, students study for a semester, then they go out and full-time paid work for a semester, they come back and study for a semester, they go out and full-time work for a semester. And it works like that, so they're doing at least 4 or sometimes 6 work terms over the course of the degree, with the top-notch degree, as well as 2 years of relevant work experience in the college. Now, why do we do that? It's very complicated. It's difficult, probably sometimes for institutions to make that happen in a meaningful way. It creates challenges for curriculum development, pedagogy, and all sorts of things. But why do we do that? And we do that because of the roots of the institution that come from that kind of a learning mentality. The region is similar in the sense that the region used to be textile manufacturing, was part of the region which evaporated, and so a rethink on what to do in the region has resulted in some changes, which speaks directly to this future of work. I'm sure you've heard of the term VUCA, V-U-C-A. The future that we're facing is one that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So that's what we're facing. All the speakers this morning spoke to that, and they just have to turn on the television or go on to whatever on the internet for 2 seconds and you'll see that. So what we do to be preparing our students for this kind of future. And there's a mechanism in place. They've got these co-op terms, so that's great. They're having these experiences around so they're prepared for this future. Because experience, as we all know, in and of itself is not enough. It's how you learn those experiences, how you develop those learning to learn, lifelong learning capabilities that enable you to do the adaptation you're going to need to develop capabilities in this future. Well, with some really interesting work in this space. I'm sure I don't know if you heard that. But they identified 4 key human skills that are going to be required to work effectively with AI and automation and all these changes that we've been talking about. So those human skills, humans bring, machines can't, humans bring creativity, curiosity, collaboration, and communication. So those are the 4 C's that this report and some people are thinking about are the capabilities that we need to develop in our young people. So how do we do that? How do you develop collaboration? How do you develop communication? What are the mechanisms to do that? As Associate Provost for Cooperative and Experiential Education, we're looking at those forms, those educational models as ways to give students experiences which help develop those capabilities. And I would say, that in addition to those 4 C's, there are a few other C's that we need to be thinking about. And specifically within the context of this gathering, cultural competence, because we are in a global world, we are interacting with all sorts of cultures, and whether one travels abroad or not, we are in very diverse workplaces all the time. And so how to navigate that space in a way that is competent and effective. And I think another C that's really important is critical thinking, critical analysis. I think that increasingly we're going to be graduating students who are not going to be happily transitioning to industry because industry may not be there, but it really is going to be people who think for themselves, be innovative, identify problems, be able to solve those problems. And I think another C that's often missing from the C is math. And fundamentally, that's what an educational program should be about, is developing that capability in people. And my goodness, we certainly seem to need a lot of it right now. So a couple of initiatives at the University of Waterloo talk about co-op program, and then of course lots of information on that if you like it. But a couple of very interesting things. This comes back to textile manufacturing going away and how did the region reinvent itself. And one of the ways that it's definitely reinvented itself was around innovation and being an innovation hub for Canada. Out of that, we have a couple of things that the University of Waterloo is very engaged in. One is called Velocity, and it's a startup incubator space for individuals, students, and others who have ideas and they want to bring those ideas to some form of food. In addition to having co-op right from the beginning at Waterloo, the other policy is that IP, intellectual property, is owned by students, faculty, staff, who owns their IP. So that is enabled a nurturing ground for innovation and invention. So Velocity is a place where students can come, for example, with ideas, business ideas, startup ideas they might have, go to Velocity and get supported, mentored. There are supports around them to help them evolve those ideas. So that, again, that's really nurturing that innovation and that agency and that self-directed future that I think we really need in some people to have. And where do they get those ideas? Often they're exposed to those ideas because they've been on a co-op work term somewhere. They've been out in industry, 3-4 different industries, and they say, whoa, this is a really interesting idea that's popping up. How can I do something with that? So it all feeds into the ecosystem. And another initiative that Waterloo has is something called Problem Lab, because there is a need to be able to identify problems, what are real problems, what are critical problems, and then be able to iterate solutions to those problems. So again, Problem Lab is another place that we do this, bringing together teams of students with support, looking at solutions, whether the solutions that will solve in a startup company or whether they're solutions that result in social mission or entrepreneurship.
Very, very good. I was listening to your list of C's, and I was thinking about civility specifically. And civility obviously is included in some of the areas that you mentioned, but my colleague, the very respected former ambassador at Thomas, who has a diplomacy studies program and came out with a new book called Diversified Diplomacy in December. Recently presented at the Civility Series in Stanford, Connecticut. And I think it seems so obvious, but at the same time, people are not embracing it. We are in need of more civility training, in my opinion, today than I think we've ever been. And we don't get enough of it. And we think, oh, somebody else will pick that up. Well, maybe not. Maybe we need to think about including that more consciously. But as we go out into this world that you described as daunting and everything else, I mean, should we be by a challenge?
I think it's really inspiring, but I think that it also, though, requires that you have students that are ready, that with the that are prepared to, with the kinds of skills to be working in this environment driven by VUCA. So I agree. I mentioned, and as soon as I say inspiring, and this, one of the things that I find that is a lot of fun in working on a college campus is that we do find that students are very rarely daunted by the big questions on things. In fact, it is, sometimes you almost wish they were a little more daunted with things. And I mentioned the Mountaintop Initiative. Let me tell just a little bit about it because I think it sort of gets to why I'm optimistic in this. So the idea behind Mountaintop, and the name for it, I might add, is because when back to the story of Steele, about 5 years ago, the university acquired what had been the old R&D facilities from Steele. And one of the things that if you're going to be doing Steele research, you get massive buildings of that. So the university acquired what were essentially these big, massive hangars that had the interesting question, what do you do with this? There was something just almost inspiring about walking into these great big open spaces that really nothing happened in them for about 20 years to do anything. And so it started something with that's called the Mountaintop Initiative, with funding from two of our alums who had been the founders of Urban Outfitters. One of the things you know about Urban Outfitters is very good about going into unusual spaces and repurposing it. So that's what was sort of inspired them about this. And the idea of Mountaintop is to come in with a question of problem, something that's one of the big questions they have to create there's a little bit of funding to do this, but essentially you have to work to kind of solve that issue is do that. So the problems that you see students taking on kind of run the gamut, and really exciting. So they are things like on the Lehigh campus, it's right on the side of Southside Bethlehem, which is a very diverse working class community. It's where all steel workers work. There's not a lot of public space interesting into this. So one of the challenges that the Mountaintop project took on was how could you create small parklets that would create kind of meaningful kind of community interactions to that you needed to be on a $100 budget to this. And so we have this team of students who are suddenly there kind of taking on something with a lot of constraints to it to create meaningful places where within the community, $100, you can create a space where people come together and they have to think about from lots of perspectives of why would people come together? What would they be doing in that? What would be the value there for that? And so there's now all these little parklets around the campus that are places where There's community activities, health services, all sorts of things that are kind of happening to that. We have students that are working on bigger, on things that are kind of broad issues. So we have a team that's working with a group of Cambodian farmers who on low-cost mushroom development, and the project was how to work with these farmers to get these mushrooms to market quickly to this. And you've got teams, again, interdisciplinary, multi-background students coming in to tackle these issues to this. What you see in this is that the students, these kind of experiences, again, why am I not daunted with this, that these are, you can get projects that are more ambiguous, undefined, but have sort of social implications to this. And require, to your point about civility, sort of the empathy, they require tremendous understanding of kind of the place communities they're going to be working with in order to find solutions. And these students are not only the brightest, but the most motivated, excited. You really see that they're making a difference there in the world. And instead of seeing kind of the daunting kind of world of all this change, rather see that as opportunity, and are more kind of ready to kind of define space in that. And I think that's where higher education is most effective with helping students kind of define their space to that and see that there is the opportunity, and recognize that it's not the kind of fixed jobs in the steel manufacturer they were going out to, but rather this future, this kind of place where they get to define their own space and make that kind of difference there to that.
Yeah, no, that's lovely, and a lovely example of the power of our students. I think to our peril, we underestimate what our students are capable of, actually. And our job really is to help prepare them and then get out of their way. And also allow them to make the impact they want to make and integrate that back into what we're doing, because that's a big piece that we don't forget. But I think the last thing we want is fear, but I do think what we do want is to build resiliency. And resiliency is something that is very complicated, of course. I think about the example of, someone mentioned Elon Musk, so it made me think of the Thai cave rescue, but in a good way. And you think about what happened with those boys that were stuck in that Thai cave and how they got out. And it was an effort of individually, they were able to stay strong individually as young boys. It's pretty remarkable. They didn't freak out. They had team support. They all really banded together as a team. And they had amazing leadership with a coach who led them through it, did not freak out himself, and enabled that collectively to build that kind of resilience that allowed for a highly successful rescue mission. So if you think about that resilience, those ingredients in that resilience, so I think my point is it's a team effort. It's something that as educators, we need to build the capacity within those students as individuals. We need to support their ability to work in teams collaboratively, because these complex problems and the world they're facing, they cannot be dealing, it's going to be very difficult to accomplish individually. And we need to be showing leadership. And the kind of leadership which isn't the sage on the stage telling them what to do or think, but it really is that coaching leadership to help them find their best selves. So that we can then get out of their way and have tremendous hope in the future, actually, because they better be capable of doing it, and we better not be afraid.
Last question. Okay, I just wanted to continue in the vein that they were exploring. Our students are bold, and we should always encourage that type of approach. I'll give you an example. One of my passions is human trafficking and modern slavery. This is an issue I've been working on for more than 25 years, and we recently stood up one of the most comprehensive interdisciplinary centers devoted to that subject. Before, I teach a honors class in human trafficking and global affairs, and the students in there were very interested. We were talking about future work in that context. They said, well, here's a great example of jobs that nobody was even thinking about, 20 years ago. What if we resolve this? What if we are the generation that manages to set free those 40 million people, however many are believed to be enslaved around the world? There's going to be endless jobs, bringing those folks back to the mainstream, educating and training and everything else. And I thought, that's a very different way of looking at something that probably nobody else has come up with, at least in my awareness of things. But you just never know. So I don't think we can afford to be afraid. I think we need to be as bold as they are. And the world of work has changed a million times throughout history. We're going through it at a faster pace now. There's a technology piece and everything else. But I think you're right. A lot of jobs won't exist. Other jobs will. We have to be there to facilitate it, make sure that we're providing not just a technical understanding of things, but the parameters in terms of management and ethics and everything else that make it all work well.
Absolutely. I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. Yes, Howard.
I want to bring up the issue of foreign language learning. My data may be old, but the last time I checked on it, something like 15 to 20% of Americans spoke a foreign language, 56% of Europeans. I'm particularly, and I want to just say before I pose the question, I think you can have compassion and civility and be globally effective without necessarily having foreign language skills. But I do think the depth and the ability to be effective in business is enhanced if you do have those skills. My specific question to both of you is, in your programs, particularly if you're sending people to 60 countries, Nora, does University of Waterloo require students to learn a foreign language, and does Lehigh? And generally, as educators, what are your positions on that?
Who wants to go first? Sure. We do not require that they learn another language. As you can appreciate, our campus is very multicultural as it is. So many of those students, English is all spoken at home. I'm not sure my colleagues from Waterloo can probably tell me this, but probably in our population, I suspect there are 50 different languages going on anyway. So just acknowledging the diversity that already exists. But the approach that we take is around developing intercultural capability. And so you've probably heard the construct cultural intelligence. So knowledge is one, and knowledge of languages is part of that. And you're absolutely right. Language is important, and is a very important vehicle for appreciating culture and appreciating where people are coming from. There's no question about that. But there are other domains that are important in being effective. So to your point that you can have those qualities without necessarily having language is true. So there's knowledge of a culture, including language. There's your motivation, both intrinsic and extrinsic, and why you're engaging. There is your strategic and cognitive capabilities, as well as how you're showing up, and you're showing up appropriately. So no, we don't require a second language, and that's only one dimension of being effective interculturally, but we are looking to support all of these so that students are effective no matter where they go. Because you may be fluent in Spanish, for example, as an additional language, but what happens if you're working in Thailand? How many languages can you learn? So it really is having that capability and that openness to learn as much as you can that's appropriate.
This is a huge issue on our campus. And Monday afternoon, when I get back, I'm having a meeting with the Faculty of Modern Languages where we're talking about precisely this issue So for most of our programs, and truly, it's like a lot of the U.S. universities, there's not a requirement that students study language to go abroad. And there's also just a practical matter that if we did, the numbers of the rate of participation we brought, because if you look at trends with language learning in the United States, and enrollments in language programs, it's declining. I think part of it is exactly what Nora was saying, that you do need to decouple language learning from intercultural competencies. And I think much like what is happening at Waterloo, we do put a real primacy on making sure that we're also talking about the kind of cross-cultural skills and wrap what we do with our internship programs and around that kind of learning and putting that emphasis there to that. At the same time, I also worry, though, that universities sometimes work against ourselves and actually we make language learning difficult, and by virtue of making it so easy to go abroad and participate in things without language learning, that sometimes we send the wrong message ourselves there to students to this. And this is actually so much of the discussion that is happening with our modern language faculty to this, of the extent to which to some extent, we're our own worst enemies, and that there are just things, and I'll use as an example of this. University of Rhode Island was one of the first universities in the United States. And one of the critical ways that they found to actually make this work, where students would do an entire bachelor's in a second language and a bachelor of science, was to simply look at the schedule and realize that you can't schedule labs at the same time that you're requiring students to take the language classes of this. And the story of this was just that how they solved the problem was just a great one of fences that the chair of the German department happened to live next door to the chair of one of the engineering departments. And they were working on a fence together and had this conversation and realized literally over the fence that if they moved the schedule around that they might be able to increase the number of students studying languages to that. Another example is, again, for many years I ran a program in Japan that was a science and engineering research program, sending undergraduate students to work in Japanese labs. Most US students don't study Japanese. And one of the things we did, we put them through a 3-week immersion in the Japanese language course before they did that. Partly it was survival, partly it was to be able to function in labs. A lot of it was part of the cross-cultural, because if you know anything about working in Japan, you know a lot about culture if you learn a lot about the language and just knowing things like honorifics and things that interesting. When we did this, one of the groups that actually talked to us and tried to talk us out of doing this language were our Japanese colleagues, who were saying, we really want the students to have more time in the lab because we think that this language class is a distraction, and we're all going to speak English anyway to this. And it took and again, sort of long message there to the students. So I share that as saying that, well, I think that these are not the same things, and I think you can students, and we do have to be realistic that the students are going into lots of places where they may not necessarily, it's not realistic that they're going to necessarily know language, and cultural competency is certainly a component to that. I don't want to downplay the importance of language study, and I think that there's also sort of a kind of a reconsideration in our academic environments about what messages are we really sending to this, and what can we do to just make it possible there for this to be something that is really part of it. Yes.
I just wanted another piece of that, I think, is the length of a school abroad program. So how do you deal with that in terms of shorter program, allow to go abroad? I don't know, the longer you're there, the better feeling and cultural intelligence. How do you balance that at your universities?
So again, you're really, because you look at trends nationally and you look at trends in the United States. For some of the students who participate in abroad programs or participate in programs that are 6 weeks or less, our numbers at Lehigh is entirely like that as well. There's a lot of really practical reasons that the intensity of curriculum, the cost, time to get to graduation. Those are all kind of factors there that are issues there with that. At the same time, there is a difference between being in country for 4 or 5 weeks of experience and being there for a year. And interesting, when the Institute for International Education released this multi-year study looking at the impact of experience abroad and employability, found that there was a difference between those students who had been abroad longer versus those who had been abroad for shorter periods of time. So I think it's a challenge to that. All of that said, I think what it comes back to is that I think the most important thing that can happen in something in broad experience is intentionality, and that I think most of us are well past the point of just thinking that you just got to toss students in and sink or swim, they'll learn. It doesn't happen that way. Instead, it's sort of building and kind of wrapping around exactly the kinds of skill sets that the colleague was talking about to this, and I think anybody who's doing it well is looking at ways to do that. I'll also add, and this is something that we're seeing, this is happening with some, again, with things like the top experience, but it's happening in other ways as well, of kind of changing up how we think about mobility. That mobility doesn't have to be always going in and out of the country, but there's a lot of other ways that continues. And your colleagues even in the earlier session, I think some of the things they're talking about kind of virtual connections to that. And so we're also seeing increasingly to the length of time to being what maybe you're in country, and I'll use our Cambodian mushroom project as an example. They were in country for really, I think, about 3 weeks with that, but the engagement on that project was a year long. And continued in different ways there to that. And that sort of begins to address the kind of reality of what the students are trying to balance and what they can, and all the constraints that go with travel. With the realism of you don't come in, you learn a culture, an ecosystem, an environment by just dropping in and out for that. And I think that's a place where you begin to see some of that balance.
Just further on, I think it's important to step back and really examine what are the long-term goals that one wants from mobility, not only mobility, but international or global experiences. What is it you're trying to accomplish? And there are many mechanisms for accomplishing that. Time in country is, of course, one. Recognizing that these experiences should be accessible to all students, regardless of their socioeconomic status. There are family obligations, mental health considerations. That's maybe not always possible. And we often forget that international mobility is two ways. Often there's a huge disconnect between our domestic students and the international students on our campuses, and how are we enriching our understanding right here. Our communities that have community members from all sorts of different cultures that we're not necessarily engaging with. There are a number of ways to have these kind of intercultural experiences, but what's often missing is a sense of what's the actual goal and what are we using to measure that we're getting there. And that's often not there. And we substitute that, or a proxy for that is, well, let's send X number abroad. Let's have X number, and it's an activity-based rather than an outcome-based.
Very good points. I see a lot of heads nodding, so I think there's a lot of like-minded individuals in the room. Great conversations, and it was wonderful to hear about Velocity, the Mountaintop Initiative. So thank you to John, Dr. Gray, Dr. Matherly. We are now going to break for lunch, but please keep in mind that after lunch, we have an exciting panel about immigration and future work in America, led by Alex Hoffman of CNN. So lunch is going to be, there are drinks in this kitchen area, food is in the lobby. You can eat over there, you can bring it back to your seats, whatever is easiest, but we are going to start promptly at noon, so please come back. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just do it well.
school, there was something called Rare Magazine. They came out with issues that had like composition cover inside, reading the magazine in school. Writing a copy.
No.
Oh, okay.
None of us. That's right out there with your Bullwinkle reference.
I have on my office door a picture of Professor Peabody. It's helping.
I got it. Here before I am.
Have a friend. I'm currently having this very curious to see.
I will. Okay, if everybody can have a seat, we're gonna try to get started here in about a minute.
Fundamental principles.
Great, thank you everyone for joining us for our last panel today. Hope you had a moment to have some food, maybe get some more caffeine, re-energize. So before we start with our last panel, I'd like to to Akabir from one of our symposium sponsors. And Akabir is from Forstay. If you could come forward.
Hello everyone, thank you so much. My name is Akabir. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Forstay. Forstay is an online marketplace for student and intern housing. People call us Airbnb for students. So today's topic is like a very exciting topic about the future of work, which is being automated and taken over by technology. But it's really, the future of work is really exciting to me because in 50 years, there'll be no work to work. So we'll be just getting paid and not working at all. So why? Because the reason is like 70 years ago or 100 years ago, people worked 70 hours per week. They were in industry, like manufacturing, doing the hard work and making less money than what we make today. Today, we probably work around 35, 40 hours a week and get the same or more money. And in Europe, they're working 20 hours a week and probably doing the same thing. And the rumors are going around that in 20 years, like we'll be only working 5 hours a week and getting the same amount of job. So I just want to be a little aggressive and say that, you know, in 30 years or 40 years, we don't have to work at all and get the same amount of money. So the question is, what's going to happen for all the people who are not going to work? So there are two cases. One, they're going to be criminals, sorry to do that, or they're going to be creative people. So actually, there is a Y Combinator. It's one of the best incubators in Silicon Valley, they have launched a kind of a pilot or about all like universal basic income, right? So are we ready for automation? Are we ready for jobs being taken away from us, right? So like what happens if all the cars become driverless, right? There are around 222 million people drive every day, right? And what happens if the cashiers, like when you go to the store right now, if I go to the store safely and grab all the things that I want and get out, probably it's gonna be and they're gonna put me in jail. But in some part of the country, in Oregon, I think, right? It's being piloted. You go and what you want, and if you have Amazon shopping cart, it's automatically charges your car. So what's gonna happen for cashier job? There are 5 million jobs out there, right? So what's gonna happen to the service people, right? When you call, they're people answering your calls, and you stay in line for hours and wait for the rep, they answering your questions. So there are around Thursday with the team. We have like Wednesday meetings. We call it like story time. It's basically you can tell any story you like to tell. So it's just like you can emphasize your vision. So what happens if everything is automated? Right? So the jobs are not there anymore. What are you going to do? So we ask the same question. Our grandfathers had the same question like 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So they had the same problem, right? In some part of the world, like how many of you like, wash your clothes with your hand? Anybody? Only a few people, right? Most of us don't do it. Actually, so in some parts of the world, people still wash the clothes with their hand, but there are machines doing it right now. Is that job is taking over, right? How many So probably those questions were asked the same way, and some of the jobs are being taken away that we actually really hate to do. So, and it's good that they're being taken away, and it's bad at the same time. The good news is that if we're not driving and the car that travels, what's going to happen? The transportation is going down. It's going to go down. The real estate price is going to go down because in New York City, the prices of one apartment is a few $1,000,000. But if you drive 2 hours away, it's going to cost you maybe 5 times cheaper. So if the food is being automated, and I was in Plant in Silicon Valley, the burgers is being automated, and they taste really delicious. So we are human beings, and we are at the same time mammals, right? We are tend to survive. So there, and fourth day, we have think what's going to happen if everybody is, kind of the jobs are taken away. So the answer was we can go back to our core values, and our core values is to be paid, is to be friendly, to be able to work in a team, to develop leadership skills that are not really tangible. Why? Because I'm from Tajikistan. If I ask this audience, how many of you know what is the capital of Tajikistan? 30 seconds. 30 seconds, literally, like, what is the capital of Tajikistan? You can ask for Excel or you can type on Google. In 30 seconds, probably everybody knows the answer, right? Because knowledge is a commodity, right? It's really right now an access and only developing like brain interface that we can connect the brain to computers, to machines. We probably know the answer. So the answer in our internal force research, we call that most important thing is going back to our core values and being able to express ourselves, be able to friendly teamwork and all things. And the question we have is how does the impact real estate, since we don't have real estate and home sharing industry? And the answer was that a lot of people from home. So, and since the cars a lot and there will be people showing a lot, the big question would be like, why people are not letting others into their home sharing is only so, and that's what so developing AI practices that probably way to your next together this way this will be eliminated. And one of our only that like working from home is not bad. It's really good actually because a lot of people already answer the emails or work somehow from their home, and I see them answering by home emails. So of our this country is being run from home office. So that's why we believe say that intercultural exchange is really important, and this, organizations like Cultural Vistas, a lot of young people are traveling the world, seeing people and getting to know each other. Like, and this is the most important thing because when we understand each other, when we have friendship, when we have like tolerance, when we understand the cultures and everything, life would be much more interesting and happier. And then, we all have to be ready for the future. And one of the most important thing is probably going to be as a solution is a universal basic income. So be ready for that. Thank you so much.
Okay, so our last panel today, very exciting, detail on immigration. Immigration and the future of work in America. So leading our panel today is Emmy and National Magazine Award winner Alex Koppelman of CNN Money.
So yes, I'm the managing editor of CNN Money, which 1 week from today relaunches as CNN Business, focusing on the future of business, on the future of the economy, really the future of the world, especially coming through tech. I'm going to use that transparent shell as a way into introducing our panel to talk about the future of work. So first we have Hasib Ahmad, who's the Director of Immigration at U.S. Services for Global Expertise, based in Dallas, Texas. He's had nearly a 30-year career, the leading expert on U.S. immigration law. And his expertise in U.S. immigration includes experience within consular, mobility, immigration support, and governmental legal research. Then we have Aisha Blackwell-Hawkins, who's the global head for talent mobility at Johnson & Johnson, where she's responsible for all aspects of talent mobility. Last year named as one of Deloitte's Women Watch in tech, media, and telecom fields. And before that was at Amazon.com for 9 years, where she focused on immigration and global mobility functions, and where we'll also talk about why my packages keep arriving in 3 days instead of promised 2. And then we also have Robert Groban, a member of Epstein Becker Green and national chairperson of his immigration law group. Over 35 years experience counseling employers on how to employ foreign nationals, working with them in developing appropriate risk management policies, and representing them in worksite enforcement and other immigration, civil or criminal litigation. There we go. That's our panel. So first question. We'll start with a very easy one. What's the what's the importance of immigration and global mobility to business and to the future of business and the future of work?
So, I mean, look, I think I've spent about a little over a decade at 3 different multinationals in at least 2 different sectors. It's hard for me to classify Amazon into what industry they actually fit in. But I think from my perspective, what I've been seeing is immigration is really about plugging gaps in skill sets. And I think in the US, there are some gaps in skill sets that we have available in the local talent market. I don't think that's exclusive to the US. I think I see that globally in different countries. There's just, either an abundance of skill sets, but there's always that gap that you need to fill. So from my perspective and what I've seen over the last 12 years, corporates usually use this to implement new skill they need to launch a new product, to build something new, or to service their customer. They will not go away, that will continue. So, it's not just about inbound to the US, but it's really globally. Most corporations are sending people either around the world or into the US. But it's not just the US problem. It's not just the US need.
Yeah, from my perspective, obviously immigration is important in my department. That's what keeps the engine running. But if you look at this clinically, you're dealing with in the United States a relatively static population, an aging population with a relatively low birth rate. Yet the economy is expanding, and it's expanding into skill sets, as I should talk about, where we're just simply not developing domestically skills we need. At the same time, we're competing on a global level. So, Japan, China, Europe, all of these skill sets are being sought globally. So the notion of competing domestically and competing successfully globally really depends a great deal on the talent mobility that you're able to attract. And that's why immigration is such a critical component of an organization's talent acquisition program, at least from our perspective.
To me, these are great ideas, and just to take it one step further, when you bring in new concepts and new ideas, it doesn't have to come from a set of pool of talent that you have available in the United States. If you talk about education, people are getting education in different ways. But every culture and society reacts to education in their own method. So in some countries, the culture towards education is to get a job, get more money, get more talents. For some people, for some cultures, for some societies, it's about their passion and then bringing in new ideas and new concepts. And when you have a matching demand in the United States, you want to widen that talent pool for yourself. And immigration is a process that complements that and provides you the opportunity to bring in, to see those talented people overseas and bring them in and then employ them, gainfully for their benefit and also for your benefit. But as you expand your market beyond the US boundaries to an international audience, you like to meet their demand. And the way you can do that is by responding to them culturally in their own culture. That's why cultural marketing is now becoming a concept with companies that are actually offering products to other countries. So that's what basically immigration does.
So let's talk about just outside the US. Uber is building a major office in Toronto. Instacart, the food delivery company, which is news as doing the same. Amazon is on the short list for HQ2. The fact that all these tech companies are looking there and looking, what does that say about the future of immigration in the U.S. and the future of work in the U.S. and mobility globally?
So it's interesting. I mean, I think there's a lot of growth upward, right? And it can be looked at 2 different ways. This seems from an immigration perspective right now, I think we can agree that immigration in the US is getting a little tighter and more restricted. In Canada, it isn't, right? And so that does make it easier. I think that can be some of the impetus for moving. I don't necessarily know if that's the only reason. I think the co-location of having a headquarters here and, a second headquarters in Canada or a nearby office just makes it easier to collaborate. So I've seen, particularly in the tech industry, that there tends to be a desire to co-locate, to collaborate versus collaborating around the world. So that could be some of it. I don't know if that will have an impact on immigration in the US, right? You don't know, and if it does, how long will it take? So meaning, if you look and say, hey, Canada, you can sort of flesh out the future of, hey, Canada has more open borders, they're creating faster, they're developing more. Maybe that will happen, maybe it won't. But would that then turn the tide here in the US to say, will this impact the US immigration? Will they get more open in that perspective? I don't know, it's hard to tell. Do you have a crystal ball that you can?
Very cloudy, and my granddaughter took it. So it's not going to work very well. I think one way to look at this, and I hate to do it legally, but that's what I do. The last major piece of immigration reform we had was 1990. And when you talk about immigration reform, you're talking about political judgments as to who should be permitted into the United States. And in that statute, one of the companions was the I-9 and enforcement. That was a whole big piece of that. But the flip side of that was a preference scheme as to who ought to be allowed. And the political judgments were made that there's certain categories of people that we need. The problem is that we're now, 28 years from 1990. The economy has changed a tremendous amount. Immigration reform cratered in 2007. When it did, Microsoft set up a facility in Canada to try and take advantage of it. But we have a severe misalignment between what our statutory permissives are and what our economic and business needs are. And what we're constantly doing is trying to fit relatively square pegs into round holes. The problem with the current administration is that I think business had generally figured out what the square pegs were and what the round holes were, with some cooperation on the part of government recognizing the statute wasn't always aligned to business interests and squeezing certain things backwards. The laws haven't changed, the regulations haven't changed, but the interpretations have changed. And so what that's done is to constrict the availability of U.S. immigration, make the whole situation a little more unpredictable, a little more inconsistent, which is very difficult from a business perspective. Because even people who are here in valid visa classification cannot be assured that when they apply for an extension, that the criteria for that extension will be the same. Early last year, the Trump administration said that it would no longer give deference to prior approvals. So everything is new. Now, they have the ability to do that, but that creates a level of uncertainty, a level of anxiety. I can't comment how that compares with other countries because I think that the perception is that the U.S. may have been a little bit easier, so we're tightening it up. But if the idea is America first workers to fill these jobs, we're not filling them. As I indicated before, we have tremendous gaps in technology. And by from a global competitive standpoint, we're actually shooting ourselves in the foot a little.
Sorry, let me just go back to Robert for 1 second. When we were talking before, you mentioned there's also a potential legal hiccup for companies trying to bring workers from Toronto to here. Can you just tell everybody about that? I thought it was interesting.
Oh, okay. Well, the enforcement side of immigration, there's a series of admissibility criteria put in the statute in 1952. So if you take a look at that, you were a communist, you got big troubles, because what was the year of 1952? It was McCarthy and a whole bunch of things. One of those admissibility criteria relates to the possession of controlled substance. So what is a current minefield in U.S. immigration, generally? You send somebody up to Canada, great, we got them in, all the rest of that. Canada is legalizing their marijuana. Their marijuana laws are being liberalized next month. So if that individual buys marijuana in Canada where it's legal, comes into the United States, are they going to be admissible? Or are they going to be rejected as a trafficker of a controlled substance, which would make them permanently excludable from the United States? We have the same issue in states that have legal laws. And so, it's just, this is a multifaceted problem. They're just issues that we're confronting. Again, the laws haven't changed, but the culture has changed. The mores have changed. Things that are perceived to be beneficial to large groups of people, where you're talking about foreign nationals, can be really death traps in certain circumstances.
I think these companies are moving solely because of the current immigration. I believe they're overreacting. This is basically temporary. It's gonna go away over time. I'll give you an example. In 2001, when we had the 9/11 incidents, I was in the Middle East working for State Department, and then suddenly we had this huge security crisis. Some countries, so our student visa population kind of like decreased. We're issuing a lot of student visas because there was a lot of scrutiny going on. DHS was being formed, so there were a lot of things in progress, and people were trying to figure out things. So everything was kind of like on hold. So all these students, international students, were coming to the United States to study here. They were kind of like lost. So one country in the Middle East took advantage of that. Dubai, UAE actually created an academic city around it and invited all these international campuses to establish their campus in that academic city. So they brought in people from universities from Canada, from the United States, from Australia, and then they will fly in faculty every month for a short period of time, and then they had local faculty hired to sort of like take care of that population. And then their student visa laws were kind of like so liberal that anybody could just walk in, get an admission, and then just be part of that. But over the years, we learned that city proved to be not as useful as they thought it was, because everybody who wanted to come in, if I were to get admission at the University of Arizona at a Dubai campus, I would get a degree from there at the University of Arizona Dubai campus. But my skill set or the kind of respect that I get out of that degree is not when I studied University of Arizona in the U.S. So that kind of like faded away, and then starting of this decade, we seeing different reactions. So the kind of the student population from the foreign student population started increasing. It's not to what was post 9/11, but it's far much better than what this academic city would have done if people had reacted the way the government of UAE had thought. So I believe in this. I think this is overreaction, and this is going to go away over time. And so people are going to come back.
And if I can just piggyback on that, I think you're exactly right. I think, the U.S. is doing fundamental to silos, right? You see this everywhere. Canada went through a phase where it was very restrictive. It wasn't that long ago where it was really hard to get workers into Canada. It's all based on the political cycle, and that's come back around. But I do remember a time when getting workers into Canada was just so difficult, whether or not they had the skill set available there, right? So it was challenging. So I don't think that's a silver bullet to managing the immigration issues here. Right?
So, not just talking about policies under the Trump administration, but going back to during the Obama administration and the Bush administration, is the immigration system in the U.S. Helpful to business? Is it helping U.S. business be competitive, or is it creating, or is it an obstacle?
I believe the immigration system in the United States is too friendly to immigrants. Our objective is actually benefits than denying benefits. So the purpose of the entire immigration system is to grant benefit to individuals who seek it legally. Now, do we need to create a balance between the system that we have and have stricter laws yes, there's a necessity for that. So we need to create some sort of a balance between the current immigration laws and the discretionary aspect of the immigration law actually makes it even more certain. Like Robert said, that the laws are there, but the implication of laws have changed. So right now, the extension is not automatic anymore. So the extension would go through because there's a huge amount of discretion involved. So the system is designed to basically provide benefit. So we need a system, immigration system where where there's a balance, where we need to find a balance between these two systems. Whether we are allowing people that we don't want to come into the United States to do all these bad things, or do you want to create a tougher immigration system to have human trafficking, have an environment for human trafficking? So you have illegal immigrations coming from South America. So I think there's a time for us to have a balanced immigration system, so it addresses both issues. But I personally believe it's a very immigrant-friendly immigration environment, and that's because I worked with this for over 28 years, looking at petitions and interviewing visa applicants. And there was always situations, and I had other colleagues who were in situations where they knew there was something wrong. The law wouldn't allow them to stop that person. So you just plug your nose.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree. I think that, first of all, we have to define what the immigration system is. What we've been focusing on is one piece of the immigration system, which is the visa classification that allows foreign nationals to come in, work, go to school, things like that. But that's just one part of it. When you talk about political judgments as to who's coming into this country, and every country has a sovereign right to determine who comes in. So it's a political judgment, it's a judgment entrusted to Congress. Family immigration is a huge piece of this. We have diversity lottery, where regardless of what you do, as long as you can read and write, you can climb dividends. Are those in our political interests? These are legitimate questions that are on the floor. When you open the book on immigration, you decide what the next generation is going to be. Family unification has always been very important. But who are we admitting? What's their educational background? Are we really advancing the economy of the United States by expanding family immigration? I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no. I'm just saying when we talk about immigration, it's an integrated system. Also part of this system is when I talked about cannabis and accessibility criteria, that's part of the system. Who comes in? The 9/11 default was, frankly, the admissibility criteria were not applied, there were no interviews. And so it has gotten tougher because now every case is interviewed in large reaction to 9/11, where the terrorists just simply was a slot machine visa issuance. Now, CETA is out of the Department of State, and historically the Department of State has been a lot more user-friendly to immigration than Homeland Security. What Homeland Security is, there were one huge dysfunctional agency, and that was the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and they broke it up into three dysfunctional agencies, which is CBP and Immigration, USCIS, and ICE. And what's been happening recently is that because of the discretion that I see talk about, the window, we submitted 2 weeks ago 3 applications that were absolutely identical. One got approved, one got RFP'd, and the other one asked for stupid little questions. RFP means a request for additional evidence. Exactly the same application. What is wrong with that system? It means it went to 3 different exams. Is it a training issue? Is it a mental issue? Part of the problem I have is that sure, things are going to change. Are they going to change next week? Are they going to change next month? The current administration was elected to put a clamp on immigration, and they are in the process of doing that. And once That's their mandate, and that's going to continue for 8 years.
When I look at this, I wouldn't say it's, too easy or too hard. I say it's relative comparatively, right? So I've seen different countries where it's very challenging, far more challenging than the US and even less predictable and consistent than it is today, as well as much easier, right? I think the difference in the US now is that it's changed and we're in that change curve. So where you see what was, as Bob talked about, where it was previously very predictable and consistent, you could manage to timelines, it helps you plan your business so you sort of know what you can apply for and you have a relative degree of certainty that you will get approved. That no longer exists. So when you, on the back end of that is a business and a job that needs to be filled, a product that needs to be launched, a team that needs to be led, or some task that needs to be done to keep your business on. That makes it very challenging to deal with that. But again, the US isn't the only market where, it's not the only country where it's unpredictable, inconsistent, inflexible. There are plenty of them like that. There are plenty that look better. So for me, I give the standard lawyer answer, well, it depends on where you sit, right? Is it too hard? Is it too easy? It just depends on, where you sit, right?
One last question from me, and then we'll open it up. As they look at the next 5 or 10 years or even beyond, what should businesses be focusing on when they think about immigration and mobility? Strategic perspective, legal, HR, holistically.
Well, we represent businesses, and part of what we do is trying to advise them to be proactive as opposed to reactive. Just some concrete examples. Take a look at what the Trump administration is contemplating. Right now, there are certain spouses of workers who were mired in the green card process who can work. And the notion is, will that work authorization remain? It was created by regulation under the Obama administration. The noise out of the Trump administration is they want to avoid it. Optional practical training for F1 students. They've gotten a year, STEM degrees, an additional 2. Is that going to remain? So when we're talking about the future of things, is NAFTA going to stay the way it is? And what's immigration under that going to be like? Are the current interpretations? I mean, to some extent, I agree with Aisha in the sense that it's the uncertainty that's the problem. If you had a predictable system, even if it was narrower than it was before, you could work around it. So trying to be proactive, you have all these moving pieces, and what you're doing is you're trying to look at the more stable elements of the business immigration process and work proactively to take advantage of them so that you can be more predictable in terms of who you can hire, what the timeline is, because I mean, aside from all the organizational interests, human interests involved in all of this, and you have individuals, and you have families, and you have all of this mixed up in the process. So what we're trying to do is let's assume that this category is not going to be here in a year. How are we going to fill those slots? How are we going to do that? If it's a multinational organization, are there global ways that we can deal with it? Are they looking at other countries to try and solve some of these problems? And so what we're trying to do, and this is, it's 2 years, 3 years, because you got to plan really 6 years out if this administration remains in the way it's going, and look at, just monitor the tea leaves of what they're doing, and try and plan to fill organizational needs within an existing system. That's a little bit of a moving target, but that's what we're trying to do.
Now, this has been such a fascinating discussion. I do want to open it up to the entire audience. Does anyone have a question specifically about immigration? Yes, please.
And you touched on it a little bit. As someone who runs a large higher ed institution where students are coming from Canada, hopefully none that have seen any cannabis, coming across the border to have internship type experiences here, it certainly makes me think that the volatility around that is such that those opportunities could be obviously at risk. Their ability to get J1 visas and these other visas. So what's your take on that? How risky is that?
what I was.
Risky, a little bit risky.
Again, the statute hasn't changed. I think the regulatory process in the J1 area, it's gotten tighter because there have been some uses. We're aware of Disneyland and we're aware of other kinds of things where the perception is that J1 trainees were used for improper purposes. What I was really more talking about is people tend to focus on the visa classification and not so much on the admissibility criteria. And so, what may have passed before, I was concerned about students unknowingly engaging in activities that may be legal in their countries and find that they're ineligible for visas because of that.
Yeah, no, I understand that point.
But, because Congress is at an impasse, I don't see any statutory changes. I don't see any meaningful regulatory changes. So I think those will still be available. The tighter piece will be in the visa adjudication part, which Hasib is more familiar with.
One of the things that I believe is very important to understand, when you're hiring or bringing in a student, it's quite different from bringing in an international student or an international employee. The timeline that you provide, the companies usually provide, they just assume that it's same as hiring a local talent. One of the things that the DHS struggles with, the USCIS especially, and INS used to struggle with that a long time ago, was the backlog. The amount of work they have and the kind of people they have available to do that. So whenever a company is going into a program that is going to engage international student or international employee, they have to give enough time. So they need to plan way ahead of time to make sure they have enough time to meet certain requirements. Not every application is successful. There could be a request for additional evidence. It could be a denial, and we could change strategies or work with the system to find ways around it. So you need to have enough time. That's I believe is the key to that.
I should add, Dr. McGrew, for most J1 sponsors, at least for marijuana, since immigration's at a federal level, we generally are not sponsoring positions in those types of industry. Any additional questions? Yes.
So I work on a J1 program, trainee intern, and I think everyone in this room has positive experiences with international exchange, working abroad, hosting. So I'm all for all kinds of international exchange. We have people on E's and H's in our office. How do you address the challenge of the public perception? You mentioned Disney under the J, but I think everyone remembers the H1B story with Disney. When they interviewed 10 people on 60 Minutes who were former Disney employees who said, I had to sit next to my replacement from a country with a lower cost of labor and train him for a week, and then I was fired. And then that gets out, and then we have the political repercussions that we've been dealing with for the last 2 years that you're seeing now also in Europe, populism, closing the borders, things like that. When you have these, what we can call misuses or abuses of valid visa categories, how do we fight that public perception?
So I think, one of the things that I've seen in my travels is that what's really important, what I was going to answer before, was around framework, right? I think all companies have to have an internal framework to manage talent mobility, and a component of that is immigration, and that framework has to be some component of your public policy or government affairs team, so that as you're looking at your company and you're deciding, okay, how do we do this? What's our public stance on this? I think there was a time where a public stance or having readily available your access to public policy wasn't necessary to say, hey, I deal with immigration, I sort of sat in my little hole and managed these pieces for different companies. But over time, with it being so politicized, there has to be a tight link across all functions of the organization so you can have that. And really what I've seen is the best way to do this is to align it to your company values, whether it's your leadership principles or your corporate values. That way you have a framework to manage decisions on how to manage that potential, what I call dark PR, right? If your company suddenly is being the target of a hit of, hey, they're using H1Bs inappropriately, make sure you have a good compliance component in place so you can stand by how you're sponsoring folks, but also make sure you understand why do you use immigration, what's the purpose of it, and then have that tight connection with your public policy teams or your government affairs teams with a policy that aligns to your internal corporate values or leadership principles. that I have found has been very, that decision-making framework has been very handy in managing to, well, okay, we're suddenly in part of a, of a press piece that says we're misusing it, or we're, hiring foreign workers over US workers. Those three pieces together can help really define how you respond.
And I think because of the public perception, the planning that goes into, whether it occurred at Disney, I think it was on 60 Minutes or UCSF, where they outsourced a program. They apparently saved hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the planning for that may not have been as robust because the public perception is predictable. So how are your public relations people getting involved? How are your government affairs people getting involved? There's also this, I've always referred to it as the ATAG repairman in the Department of Justice. There's this Office of Special Counsel was created in the 1986 Act that created the I-9 process because they were worried about discrimination. And one of the things that's occurred in reaction to the Disney is they're looking at discrimination under the immigration laws, US citizens versus foreign nationals, in precisely those kind of situations. So it's a collage of planning involving legal, involving public relations. If you're using agents, especially because that's been the favorite whipping boy of a number of administrations, then the public response is predictable. If you're going to have a layoff, you're going to have some situation where you're bringing in H-1 workers and it's going to affect local workers. So you need to have an action plan that's not simply, I think, purely compliance, but you got to be able to tell the story. I mean, there was a story at Disney. There was a story at UCSF, but I'm not sure that they got out in front of it. And so they were reactive in a way that made it difficult to recapture things. I mean, ultimately, the lawsuits at Disney were dismissed and all the rest of that, but I'm not sure the story ever got out.
Any addition?
I just have something to add to the perception part. The perception is on both sides. It's just not on the US side. It's also on the foreign worker side. Because foreign workers that the embassies deal with overseas, they actually have a perception about the US society and the US business environment. When they commit to a certain amount of money because of, and the company is offering job to the foreign worker because of cheap labor, when the foreign worker comes in, they have to live in these lifestyles and these conditions, and that actually changes the perception. So you must have noticed, if you follow immigration, agent petitions that were there a long time ago are kind of like dying, because that was the basic source of bringing in cheap labor into the market, put them on a bench for a while, and then find them projects to place them in different placements. And Robert is right. H-1B is always on the top of every government agenda or every organization's agenda for immigration, because they see all these workers taking jobs. But they bring in talent. But I think the perception is on both sides, not just from one side, but overseas foreign workers are also learning now that H-1B is not the solution, because there's a family pressure, there's a family issues with this. When the families are separated, people are not able to bring in their families to the United States due to the H-1B, certain restriction on the H-1B, or they go through certain financial hardships. So I think the perception is on the board.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
So I appreciate your comment about from the perspective of business and patent, a lot of the challenges is that we're in a period of transition and trying to sort this through to that. And I see that very much from the side of the university to this. And so I want to ask a question, sort of a little bit of guidance of this, of kind of the communications we have from the university side. One of the issues we know that in terms of recruiting top international students to come to study in the United States, the global market's going to be much more competitive. And one of the factors that is a major issue for international students in deciding where to study is an issue of employability. Not just where am I likely to get a job, but how is that return on investment of my degree likely to translate in ability to get a job? One of the challenges we have from the university side is exactly that same sort of unpredictability. And so when talking about some of the things like OPT and being able to do that kind of planning because of the kind of uncertainty in that space, and we don't know what's gonna happen, it's making it very, very, very difficult to give a clear message about how to anticipate or how to get sort of that return for get experience that would be necessary for their degree. Any guidance and from the university side to this of how we message this out as we are also dealing with this particular kind of period of uncertainty as the system is kind of working its way through to this?
You know, that's a hard one, right? Because I think companies, more often than not, at least the companies that I've been associated with, you know, compliance was a premium, right? So you want to be able to say, hey, we're compliant, we'll do what the law allows us for, you know, regular business needs. But that issue, and I had wondered if it kicked to the universities, that when will it be not such a great place to get a degree? One of the things I saw in my travels was that, you know, employees, you could say, hey, if we apply for the H-1B, you don't get it, then we may be able to transfer you out to another location. And there was real resistance to that. It was very specific. I have all of these US loans for my school. That salary you're going to give me in this market is not going to be effective to pay off those loans. And so, you know, it was almost predictable that this would happen, that if there wasn't a guarantee that I could work at least for a period of time and be able to pay off the loans that I had for school, that I may not come here. So it's an interesting, I don't have any good advice other than, you know, I think what you could do and you know, my prayer role is started socializing with, hey, there's certain companies where you're going to be able to grow no matter what country you sit in. You're going to get the good work. You're going to be able to use your skill set there. And if it's in the US, great. If it's not, there's other places you can go and start to really look at those multinationals that have those rotational programs or those spaces where they say, hey, we want the talent. There are certain companies that say, hey, we want the best talent in the world, no matter where they are, and we'll place them as long as they're within our ecosystem. And maybe that's the focus on, hey, there are companies like this, you will work, maybe it's not in the US, but you will get to do the work that you're passionate about and the work that you've trained for.
Yeah, I think.
I know that's an answer, but.
Well, yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think part of it is that the educational community needs to be far more active in terms of lobbying the administration, legislators that sit on committees, in terms of where these rules are going. The other piece is that career opportunity departments need to be a lot more active in locating the kinds of organizations so that for your top students in your predictable categories, there is an end path that you form partnerships with companies that can provide a light at the end of that particular tunnel. But, you know, from our side, there are only a certain number of arrows in the quiver and they're getting smaller. So it's very difficult to message that. I know there's a lawsuit pending in the DC circuit, and part of it has to do with this question of STEM eligibility. And every month, the Trump administration submits something to the DC circuit that says, wait a few months, we're dealing with it. So it's like sitting there with a sort of Damocles hanging over you, and you're not quite sure what's going to happen. But to me, sitting back and waiting for that sword to drop is not the solution. Being far more active in this administration seems to be somewhat sensitive to the political ramifications of a number of things, and it just seems to me that's the way to hammer it, as well as be more active in a career opportunity setting so that we're not simply somebody comes in looking for a position, but we're forming partnerships that might provide a better mechanism for your students.
Great questions and great answers. I'd like to thank Alex and Hasib and Aisha and Robert for their information today. And quickly, as we wrap up, I'd like to invite Dr. Jennifer Clinton, Cultural Vistas President and CEO, to the front. Thank you, Elizabeth. What a great morning, afternoon, full of really, really critical discussions and conversations. I would like to extend a really warm and big thank you to all of our speakers today. We can give them a round of applause. As well as our sponsors who made it possible today, University of Waterloo, Dr. McRae, thank you, and thanks to your team for having such a great showing today. Global Expertise, as well as Zamaros and Forstay, we're really happy that you were able to support today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, the food, and the views. This is a really important conversation for us at Cultural Vistas. We really sit in between the space in between higher education and the workplace. So we're constantly thinking about how both of those sectors are evolving. And we're not just about providing experiences, international work experiences for our participants. We're really about preparing them for many of the dynamics that we talked about today. It is a little bit scary. It is a little bit exciting. Lots of shifts that are happening, and we'll be celebrating this evening our 55th anniversary as an organization. And as somebody talked about earlier today, we've seen these types of shifts before. We've lived through them, and it's important for us to remember that though it feels new and a little bit scary, these evolutions happen. And really, it's our goal and our commitment to help prepare young people, to help equip them to be successful, to be resilient, to embrace the opportunity. And we invite you to join us together as a community to really achieve that goal. And want your creativity, your ideas of how we can kind of be a force and a catalyst for making sure the next generation can step forward with the skills that we talked about today that are going to be so incredibly important despite all the changes. So thank you for being here. We have a few cookies left today, and take your time to mingle with each other. If you haven't exchanged business cards, now's the opportunity to do that. And we welcome you back here. We'll be having more events like this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I enjoyed that.